Module 4, Philosophy of Religion, Lecture 4A, Definition, Proofs of God. Philosophy of Religion. Philosophy of religion uses the methods of philosophy, the give and take, the argument, rational inquiry to study the claims of religion. Claims about God, claims about good and evil, claims about the soul, etc. We're going to begin with a series of important definitions. Preliminary definitions. Theism. Belief in a God outside the natural world that intervenes in the world. Most Western religions are theistic. Most Eastern religions are not. So Judaism, Christianity, Islam are all theistic religions. They practice theism. Polytheism says there's multiple gods, similar to animism, which says that God or spirit animates most everything, animals, mountains, so on. It sees godlike intentions in many natural objects. Polytheism, there's many gods. Monotheism, there's only one God. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all monotheistic religions. Pantheism, God and nature the same. We already studied Spinoza, who was a pantheist. Panentheism, that's kind of a fancy word. God is both within and outside nature. So God is in nature like the pantheists, but also outside of nature. Many mystical systems, such as Kabbalah, are panentheistic. Deism, sometimes pronounced deism, God created the world, but does not intervene in the world. Creation is part of God, but God doesn't answer prayers or act in history. Many Enlightenment thinkers, such as Thomas Jefferson, were deists. Atheism, there is no God. Agnosticism, from the word gnostic, which means knowledge, we cannot know if there is a God. Atheism is not the same as agnosticism. An atheist is someone who says there is no God. An agnostic says, I have no way of knowing. Fideism, reliance on faith rather than philosophy or science in religious matters. We're going to be studying Kierkegaard. He was a fideist. Fideists would not talk about philosophy of religion. They would say you just simply have to have faith. So let's turn to theism now. Theism has a number of attributes of God. God is omniscient, which means all-knowing. God knows everything. Good question is, does God know the future? Does God know what I'm going to eat for breakfast tomorrow? That's one of those questions that theists have to answer. Omnipotent. God is all-powerful. Omnipresent. God is everywhere. Beneficent. Sometimes people say omnibeneficent. God is good. If you're going to say that God is omniscient, omnipotent, and beneficent, God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all good, then you're immediately going to run into the problem. So why would such an all-good, all-powerful, all-knowing God allow evil in the world? We will be dealing with that issue in this module. 3 proofs of God. These are the 3 classic proofs that philosophers speak about: the ontological, the cosmological, and the teleological proofs. An a priori proof. A priori, remember, says it's in your mind before you look out in the world, before experience. This is a proof that comes from just thinking about the definition of God. The ontological proof for the existence of God was first invented by St. Anselm, 1033 to 1109. And his picture's on the right. Versions have been used by Descartes, Spinoza, in the 20th century by the great mathematician Kurt Gödel, 1906 to 1978. It's based on the definition of God as a perfect being. Imagine a being, quote, than which nothing greater can be conceived, unquote. The greatest being you could imagine, a being with every perfection. Such a being must exist. For if it did not exist, we can conceive of something greater. It's greater to exist than not to exist. Since it has every perfection, it includes the perfection of existence. It's greater to exist than not exist, therefore God exists. That's the ontological proof of God. Spinoza supported that proof because he said, the essence of God requires existence. By essence, we mean the very definition of God. Ganilo, an 11th century Benedict monk, said the same argument can be used to prove there's a perfect island. He was trying to make fun of the proof. Imagine an island of which none greater can be imagined. Well, such an island must exist, because if not, you can imagine a greater island. Of course, Anselm rejected that, said that this proof only applies to God. Human Kant rejected the ontological proof. Kant said that existence is not a predicate. It's not something that describes. To say God is good or wise, to add a predicate, to add an adjective, to say that God exists. Existence is not a predicate, so we can't use existence to say something is greater or lesser. I think that Kant has a point, that that's a real problem with the ontological proof. 2 a posteriori proofs. These are proofs from looking out into the universe. The cosmological proof was made famous by St. Thomas Aquinas, 1225 to 1274, pictured on right. Actually, Aquinas brought 5 different proofs of God. Many philosophy books have the 5 proofs Aquinas brought. Here's one of the 5. Everything has an efficient cause. You remember when we studied Aristotle, efficient means the thing that made it come into being. Everything has an efficient cause, which itself has an efficient cause, creating a chain of causation. We cannot have an infinite change. There must be a first cause, an uncaused cause. Or Aristotle called it an unmoved mover. This is God. God got the whole process going. There are many problems with this proof. Hume said that causation cannot be assumed. We don't even know that causation exists. So we can't use this proof. Also, why can there not be an infinite chain of causes? But finally, I think the best argument against it, even if there is a first cause, why should we assume that it is God, the God of classical theism? Plato assumed the universe was created by a lesser creature he called the demiurge. The teleological proof was brought by Aquinas but made famous by the naturalist William Paley, 1743 to 1805, pictured on the right. This is the one that clergy, myself included as a rabbi, most use. Imagine you found a watch on the ground. You realize the watch did not come together by random chance. Certainly the organization implies there's a watchmaker. There's something that put it together. In a similar way, the organization in the universe, the organization found in nature, implies there's a designer, some kind of divine watchmaker. This is actually a proof by analogy. Critique. The analogy breaks down. Even if you assume a designer, that designer may not be God, maybe a lesser God. Why is there so many things that just don't work right in the universe? But the biggest criticism of that proof goes back to Darwin. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection explains design through a natural but blind process. There's no mind, there's no will behind the design, according to Darwin. Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, entitled one of his most famous books, The Blind Watchmaker. Blind watchmaker because, yes, there's a watch, there's design, but it's blind chance, and they can be explained up by Darwin. Kant attacked all a posteriori proofs of God, saying that we could only know the phenomenal world, not the noumenal world. He said that since we lack knowledge, this makes room for faith. Kant really thought that he was strengthening Christianity with his philosophy. So even if these 3 proofs of God are ultimately unsatisfying, philosophers have developed other reasons to believe, and we'll turn to that in the next lecture.